packed, and there's plenty of things. We could have worked on that topic for like a month long and never done the same thing twice. But it was really awesome experience because every question that goalkeepers had, we answered with the principles of goalkeeping. And it might be different, right? Like if you and I are training, it might be your answer might be different than my answer. And we want that. We want to bring awareness. Like that's our objective with every session, whether we're working with 8-year-olds or pros, is we want to bring awareness to something. And then that something could be yourself mentally, yourself physically, your team strategy, your opponent's strategy, whatever that might be. We want to bring some more awareness to that so that you feel like maybe you didn't nail it and the execution, but you understand maybe the decision a little bit better, or you understand the position a little bit better, or you're curious. You're curious about, hey, how else could I do this? Right? I've always been set in this cookie cutter mold of what it has to be, but like, what else could it be? Or what else could I be capable of? So I think going into the week, we were really mindful of here are our intended outcomes for the week, and here is what we hope. People might not execute it perfectly every time, but there's just some more curiosity and awareness around these decisions.
Yeah, and I think that something that's kind of important to highlight here too is like it's not like we're like these will be our sessions every single day and this is
Mm-hmm.
what it will look like and I will stick to it. There's honestly no rigid structure besides like I mean I guess we have our model of how we run training, so that could be a whole nother podcast, but we have an idea, we have principles, and we're gonna let things kind of play out. That way we can make almost like flexible decisions that are gonna best serve the people we're working with. So there's a plan, there's an agenda, there's a design, but there's also still room for flexibility. That way if it's like, oh gosh, they're really not getting it. Doesn't mean we're gonna break it down and be like, okay, let's do this really technical training. It just means like they need more support. So rather than move on to X that we had planned, we're going to stick with a little bit more of a progression or a regression to A so that they can kind of walk away with an understanding or get a chance to explore more of what we're trying to get out of today.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Tor, is like coaching isn't a hard, fast
Right.
thing that it's like 6 reps of this and they'll get it, or like 2 sets of 4,
Perfect.
right? Like
Yeah.
it's, I think that that's why coaching is so beautiful is like you have to use your gut too, and you have to observe. And I think if, as coaches, if we could put our focus on observing more and talking less, we probably would run a more effective session, right? Because if I'm observing that goalkeepers are having a struggle with touching into space, I can manipulate the exercise to get them to do that and explore it and try it without necessarily telling them to do it, right? Um, and I think also one more point. I know you want to interject, and that's great. I One more point is like I this is so important, and I tell goalkeepers this all the time, is that you don't need a positive outcome to have learned something. You don't. Like, well, people will be like, well, their first touch is terrible, so why would I put pressure? And I'm like, well, why can't they learn within the context? And what does success look like in that training environment anyway? Maybe it's not to technically execute something perfectly with no context. To me, that's never the answer. Maybe it is to just you make it a little bit messy and let them explore taking touches, and whether it's too big or whether it's too small, there's a consequence to those actions, and they start to adjust and self-organize on their own, like without having to necessarily take it, put it out of context, isolate it, and then what, relearn it back in context. That to me, that's just like a complete waste of time. So if we have two things, the ability to adjust based on what we see and adjusting our expectations of what the outcome could look like or what it should look like or what success looks like, I think we're going to be able to, one, enjoy our sessions more, but two, it's going to be more effective.
For sure. Um, as always, I'm just writing some notes. Got me thinking. But yeah, I mean, it's affordance. How are we creating opportunities that look like the game and allow you to manage in the game? Like,
Hmm.
yeah, sometimes people need to know that you're a young goalkeeper, right? You're not locking your ankle when you kick the ball. Try locking your ankle. It could look like this. But
Hmm.
why practice that 1,000 times uncontested when in the game it's not going to happen uncontested? Let's
Right.
give them those tips, tools, strategies, but let's still do it in our game realistic manner.
Well, I think that's the point, Tor, is like we don't want to create goalkeepers that all look the same.
No.
We don't want them to all look the same. We don't want to just work on the execution and drill into them. It has to be this way, right? There
Hmm.
was a fantastic track runner, Michael Owens, I think. But whatever, he had like a hinge in his gait that's different than most people. And a coach tried to change it, and he wasn't as effective. He wasn't as fast. Like, he was the fastest man in the world. And then they
Or
were
Jesse
thinking,
Owens.
just one of them. No, I think I don't
Mike.
know, whatever. It was a track
We're not
runner.
runners.
We're not runners. He was an Olympian. He was one of the fastest in the world. They wanted to change his gait, but it didn't work for him, right?
Right.
So we want to create an environment that where effective goalkeeping is really the outcome, like finding
Right.
the solutions, not just doing the solution over and over and over and over. So we look the same because that might not be effective for some people,
Right.
right?
You're gonna
Setting the
take from them.
exact same way might not be the most effective way, and we could be doing more harm than good by forcing people to do something a certain way.
Absolutely. Which I think really well gives us a transition to point number two, communication. We had at our camp between 2 days, I don't know how much crossover there was, but probably somewhere around 100 goalkeepers, different goalkeepers, probably more that we got to work with.
More, yeah.
And we could not coach any of them the same, right? Like
Mhm.
they weren't going to learn what we were trying to teach or how we were trying to support them if I gave them all the same way to do the same thing. That's why it's here's our curriculum, let's run it the way you would, give feedback based on what you see. Not everyone's going to get the same feedback and allow them to explore. Now, take that same thing and all these amazing women that we got a chance to work with Monday through Friday. They are all some of the best in the world, some of the best at being goalkeepers. They play in leagues that require a lot of them, whether they're the one, two, or three. And we could not coach a single one of them the same. Therefore, our communication based on their knowledge, their skill set, their familiarity with certain jobs of a goalkeeper had to kind of be different. And I think it was on, the four of us being me, you, Kieran, and Maria to really make sure that we were investing in understanding who they are as players and kind of where they were at. That way we could kind of guide and communicate and collaborate with them in a way that was going to help them best see our intended outcome and get takeaways and questions from the week.
Mm. Yeah, communication is so important. Obviously, that stems from like a good relationship, which was hard because some of the people we never even met before our
Right.
first day of training. So that became more difficult. But I think sometimes too is that as coaches, we can communicate through our session design. And
Yep.
I think that's one of the more undervalued aspects of how to communicate is through session design because you want to create an impetus for change, right? So instead of me telling you that you're out of position, there might be some resistance to that if I just say, hey, you're out of position. But if I score on you when you're out of position and exploit that weakness, I'm creating an impetus for change where I might not have to say you're out of position, right? Just me consistently doing something to someone and exploiting them now creates a little more buy-in, and I'm communicating, hey, through my actions, we need to make an adjustment here, right? And still, then if they aren't changing, then obviously you want to use your communication and leverage that maybe to, ask them to pair and share and talk about what they see or how they feel or what's been hard. You can kind of check for understanding to see if they even know that they're out of position at all. You can check for understanding of like, I did this because, and then you can get a little bit more to the root of the problem, right? But communication is so important, and I think there's more creative ways that we can use to communicate rather than just our words.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so that kind of leads me to a question for you. When you think about the fact that, we're training with some people that we've never met, whether we're talking the youth side or in that pro environment, how do you create that connection or figure out how you're going to best collaborate with them? Because
Mm,
not everyone's used to that. Like growing up, I went to a session and the session was ran and I was a participant.
hmm.
So how do you kind of work with that as a coach?
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier for us, if I'm being honest, than maybe just the average coach listening to this potentially, because we have a reputation of really caring about people and supporting people and like being advocates for pushing the position forward. And, whether it's on social media or, a quick interaction with any of the coaches at TKI, I feel like people really know that and they get that and they feel safe with us. It's just who we are and the environment that we try to create. And we're very outwardly expressive and explicit about the environment we want to create. So I think it's a little bit easier, but there's so many different ways, like checking in with someone, Tegan Y, never met her before we worked with her. Emmy Allen, never met her in person before we met her, worked with her. But like sending a text to be like, hey, really care about you and helping you get the most out of this week. So what can we support you with?
Mm,
Okay, yeah, here's just send me like two or three things. And you know what? I've had already watched their film, so I knew what we wanted to help them with, but like also giving them a voice and like
yeah,
agency in their narrative and like bringing, again, this is a way to bring attention is
right.
ask, okay, well, we're going to do that. We're absolutely going to work on service from the half space. And so you're going to have plenty of opportunities. And before you even get there, I want you to think about what are some of the hardest parts about that for you? And what are some questions that I can support you with more? Or doing our class.
Welcome to the Keeper Institute podcast. My name is Tori Corsaro. I'm a strength and conditioning and goalkeeper coach here at the Keeper Institute and your host for today's show. The Keeper Institute is a unique goalkeeper training facility in New Jersey aimed at developing better goalkeepers and better people. On this podcast, we will be discussing all things goalkeeping, character development, and more.
Welcome back to another episode of the Keeper Institute podcast.
Bow, 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 bow.
Couple of floating heads coming at us.
Do you have a go-to air horn?
I think so.
I think I do too. I think I do the same air horn every week.
Sometimes I do it in training when I get really excited about something that happened.
Fun fact about Tori, I just use a full name, like beginning, middle, last name. That's when you know it's like a worldie.
But be honest, sometimes you make up a middle name for that player.
Oh, yeah. Limbo and Kern.
Always Gene. It's always Gene.
And it's this whole thing with Gene. Anyway.
Let's talk about potential.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm pretty pumped about this one.
So we're talking about potential. Obviously, Jill's pumped. I'm excited. We're going to give you a couple things that we think are underrated attributes of potential. So, we were just kind of workshopping with some names, like you got potential all wrong, identifying potential. But you know what? 4 underrated attributes of potential. So that way, when you think and you see a goalkeeper, it's not just about performance. It's not just about like what you saw between the lines, but what can we really be looking for to identify true potential, true ceilings or lack thereof in goalkeepers?
Yeah, I think that it starts with that most people have potential wrong because they'll see a performance and they think, wow, that person has a massive potential to be incredible. And sometimes that's true, but it's not always the best indicator of future success. Current performance is not always the best indicator of future success. There's so much more behind a current performance that needs to be factored into, does someone really have massive amounts of potential? Obviously, there's some things that are non-negotiables, like an efficient mover, somebody who's mobile, right? Like those are all the staples, non-negotiables, if you will, of a good goalkeeper, right? Synonymous with goalkeepers, the ability to move well. You have to be a good mover, right? But what are some of the underrated things that maybe you wouldn't see from current performance, and maybe you would have to dig just a little bit deeper to truly understand? And I think this conversation is relevant for coaches, right? Because coaches have to go and to these showcases and pick somebody based on their performances, right? And there's maybe some more questions that they could ask to get to know more about the person that they're potentially going to recruit. But I think this conversation is great for goalkeepers as well, because we can be mindful of intentionally implementing some of these things into our training sessions, which will ultimately help us be the best people and goalkeepers that we can be.
Absolutely. Because number one, right, that we wrote down was character. So the character piece, that is something that is huge. And that's within our control, right? We might learn one thing and find out about ourselves that, like, sometimes in certain situations we act one way. But if I have awareness comes choice, right? So now I might have realized that when like I get really frustrated, my work rate drops. But if I have a coach like you, Jill, who's like, hey, I've noticed this about you, it gives me a moment to reflect and be like, you know what? That's not who I want to be. And I can adjust that part of my character. I can adjust to be like, when I get frustrated, I'm going to express that. That way I don't feel like I'm taken out for the next 5 reps and not getting anything out of training. So that character piece is definitely an underrated part of your potential, but it's also something that if you're a goalkeeper listening to this, that can be well within your control.
100%. I mean, when I watch goalkeepers on TV, and let's say like when we played for or when we coached at Sky Blue, we had to choose a goalkeeper, right? And it was all these goalkeepers available in the U.S. And ultimately, we decided on Kaylin because we thought that she embodied massive amounts of potential. But got on a call with her, got to know her a little bit, talked to her coaches, talked to some of the opponents that she played against. I wanted to know about her character. Is she an open person, right? Because we could have seen her performance and said, wow, she has so much potential. But if she wasn't open to change, then the amount that someone can improve is so little, right? If they're not open, if they're not willing, if they're not maybe vulnerable enough to hear some feedback and try and explore feedback, even necessarily when it might not come off immediately, that it might be, hey, we're in this for the long-term development. Somebody who's resilient and somebody who's open to trying new things and brave is going to exponentially grow more than someone who has a fixed mindset about who they are and what they're capable of doing. And that's not to say that someone can't grow. It just might be a little bit harder, or someone might not have such a great of an upside if they're just not willing to try and explore some new ideas.
For sure. And I think you give really good points of like, okay, here's some things we could do to kind of learn more about their character, right? You might learn a little bit depending on what game you go to watch. Are they facing adversity, or is their team doing really well? Is someone on their team having a hard go and they're there as support? What's the way they talk and communicate both with their team and with their coaches? But I also think that like your point about talking to opponents they play against, like that's brilliant. You're going to get a real feel because like who are you when your back's against the wall, or who are you when that person doesn't necessarily have like a direct correlation to you. I know I want to be nice to my teammates, but do I go out of my way to be nice to my opponent? Kind of like seeing that could give you a lot of intel. But I also think your next point leads us into what we had as our second attribute, which is flexibility. Having that that ability to adapt to whatever's going around and not feeling like you have to be for lack of a better way to say it, like in control at all times of whatever's happening. Like having that feeling of like, okay, this is uncomfortable for me, but I'm going to make the best of it by doing XYZ.
Yeah, I do think that flexibility and adaptability just allows for goalkeepers to solve a multitude of different problems within the context or landscape of an entire season, but also maybe you play 2 games in a weekend, like you play against an aggressive high press and you play against a low block, and your goalkeeper can adapt and be flexible within both of those opponent strategies, or even within the context of a game. We thought they were going to sit back, but now they're high pressing and your goalkeeper can adapt. But also like different goalkeepers can play, interpret the position however they feel best suits their skill set, right? So let's just say I'm a more reactive goalkeeper and you think that you can help me and you have potential to teach me about being more preventative, right? I want to be open to that, but also have the attributes to be able to fulfill that. And as a goalkeeper, we really want to be the most adaptable goalkeepers we can be so that we're not rigid, like we only can play in one team, right? We want to be able to play in whatever team, in whatever strategy, against any opponent employing any strategy. So the more flexible someone is, let's say you see a goalkeeper play super high off their line and they make a mistake in behind the back line while trying to protect the space. Well, to me, that's really important that I see that. Because I see that they're trying to be preventative, right? And the execution might not come off, but the bravery is there. The ability to adapt to a situation, it might not fully be developed, but if I can help nudge in some certain areas, it looks like someone's willing to play that way, right? So for me, it just allows teams to play in a much more unpredictable manner, having someone who's flexible and adaptable. But that's just the way the game is. You don't see the same scenario twice, right? Either you're a different person or the scenario is different. So to me, that's like a massive, massive upside.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's like, I think it falls in line really well with being a problem solver and quite frequently, I think some of the best goalkeepers in the world can solve problems. It doesn't have to be picture perfect. Doesn't have to look exactly like what it did in training. It's not technical. It's more, okay, this is a problem that's made for me to solve, but I have tools in a toolkit that I've learned from training, and I'm going to employ them now. So I think that, like, that's the biggest way that we can kind of extend your comfort zone, extend your development, but also give yourself an edge in terms of, like, how you treat each game.
Yeah, I think that kind of really segues into one of our another points, though, is having a good game understanding and playing toward your strengths, right? So I understand what the opponent is doing and I understand what the situation calls for, and I'm going to interpret this best to my skill set, right? So I'm more preventative and I'm quicker, and so I want to impact the ball and be prevent as possible. Whereas maybe someone else wants to sit back and react. You have a keen idea of how ideally you want to solve solutions, but you feel competent to do it in both ways. So if the opponent takes a touch you can impact, you feel comfortable. Okay, good. I've got shapes that I can close down and impact the ball. If they take a touch I'm not sure I can impact, great. I also feel comfortable to be able to stand back and react. If I had a choice, this is what I would want to do. And I think that having the idea of, if I had a choice, this is what I would want to do, is so important, or else you get erratic decisions and you don't really set yourself up for success, because I don't really feel comfortable spreading to my right-hand side, right?
Sure.
It is what it is right now. Maybe I'm going to get better at it, but in a game on a weekend, if I have the, maybe where it's gray, I don't really feel comfortable spreading my right, I'm just going to stand back and react. Like, having that awareness, I think is it allows for more potential to be untapped, if you will.
For sure. Yeah, I just think that when we talk about, like, this part of potential, it's knowing, okay, here's what I'm good at, and being able to identify that, and also then combining it with your flexibility. And like I said in my earlier point about flexibility, it just leads to problem solving. I have to know what I'm good at, because what I'm good at is surely going to be different than what my coach was good at, or what my coach prefers to teach, or my training partners, or my fellow goalkeepers. Everyone's going to have something that they're a little bit better at than other people, and you're going to struggle with things that are different than, like, other people as well. So it's knowing those things and being able to take in and process your information, understand and hear feedback, but also be able to decide what works best for you, because ultimately when you're in, you have to make a decision that serves you. And it's not to say you can't grow and be better in different areas. Right. It's just to say that, like, if I don't think I'm a very fast goalkeeper, setting a couple yards off my line might help me cover more of that ground, versus you might choose to stay a little further back because you know you can cover that ground.
Mm-hmm. I think probably reflecting back now as we're talking, really the point here is self-awareness, is like maybe the underrated element of potential, is just being really self-aware. Like, where am I strong and where can I still grow? Where are my maybe kinks in the armor, and where do I feel like I am rock solid? This is who I am. I'm going to show up as best I can in this situation every time, whether that's your moral character, your performance character, your tactics, your decision making, whatever that is. This is what I know I can rely on in all circumstances, and these are still parts of my game that I'm still trying to develop. And sometimes, like, I do think the best goalkeepers in the world are probably the most self-aware and like curious, which I think is like a massive part of like character. But I think sometimes, like, seeking out others' opinions as well could be really helpful too. Like, there might be a blind spot in your game where you feel like, I need to have a little bit more self-awareness. And so I'm going to maybe ask Tori, like, what her thoughts are and see if I can gain a little bit more clarity there.
I'm not challenge you, but build off it, is like, there also comes a point where you have to make sure you're not doing that to get an answer. Right? Yeah, like, I feel like I've worked with or met goalkeepers where it's like they want to be told what to do because they don't want to have the decision and almost like have that on their hands, where it's like, no. Seek information to process and to apply as fits. What we say, no matter what coach you work with, what we say does not go. What we say is not written in gold. It is simply an idea from our perception and our understanding of both coaching, playing, soccer tactics, goalkeeping. Like, you have to take everything and you have to be able to process it in your own way and see how it fits for you. So asking questions is great. Relying on someone to give you answers is not my favorite.
Yeah, I more meant like if you go to someone, you say, here's where I feel like I can develop, fill in the gaps. Like, here's where I've really well thought out where I want to be more comfortable. Where else do you feel like I need more support? You know, it's not going with a blank page and be like, fill this out for me, fill out this evaluation for me, and let me know what you think. No, I'm coming to you with well thought out, intentional questions or feedback and asking for a little bit more support.
Oh, I knew what you meant.
Yeah, or
like our listeners knew what you meant.
Yeah, or like, hey, add one more thing. Add one more thing to my list where I can be better. Like, this is where my focus is, but you add one more thing based on your assessment of me in the last month or whatever it might be.
Brilliant. All right, last one. I think we saved it for last on purpose because it was not last in our list, but you skipped over it to save it for last, which is telling. And just disclaimer, neither of us are experts on this, and I think both of us still experience this, but nerve strength.
Mm-hmm.
Having nerve strength, and not to say someone doesn't get nervous, but having the strength to essentially be resilient and stay in it even when like you're feeling a little bit of that anxiety or like the stressors of being a high level athlete or being a competitor in general. Having that attribute can really tell you a lot about someone's potential.
Yeah. I think it's not just an attribute, like you either have it or you don't. I think it's a better way to think about it is a relationship with pressure. How is your relationship with pressure? Yeah, like, are you constantly running away from those moments and trying to not feel and accept it? Or are you leaning into it and you're saying, okay, well, if I didn't have that test on Friday, I would never study. And if I didn't study, I wouldn't be, more knowledgeable in this area. And that game is an opportunity. Okay, great. Here's how I'm going to prepare for it. And this is an opportunity for me to express myself and see, a good measuring stick or litmus test or just an opportunity to have fun, right? And I'm not saying it's either all or nothing. And maybe our relationship with pressure changes based on the day and like how we're feeling or our situation, our circumstances. But more times than not, how do you view pressure and the relationship with it, I think is going to be really indicative of your future as a goalkeeper, right?
Yeah.
If you are constantly running away from it and every time there's pressure on you, you choke and you're like, I hate it. I don't like this game anymore. I just want to quit. Like, maybe that's good. That's like an alarm bell for us to have a little more self-awareness to prepare differently for those moments, because pressure inherently is not bad. It's not. It's just how we view it. It's a neutral thing. It is what it is. Right? Like, we have a game and it's important and it's meaningful to us. Do we let it cripple us and paralyze us? Which sometimes that happens to me. Hand up, that happens. But I think as I'm getting older, then I'm more inclined to accept it, talk about it, name it, and just have a radical acceptance for whatever the outcome is going to be. That I've prepared my best, that my performance is not indicative of who I am as a human being and my character, that the outcome, I'm still going to be okay with whatever it is.
Yeah, and I think that, like, as with most things with the mental side of the game, we think that we can just be like, oh, it'll get better, or I'll think about it once or talk about it once, but it's just like your non-dominant foot. If I avoid it or I use it one time in training, it's not going to miraculously be ready to take non-dominant goal kicks or to manipulate pressure, put it on that foot and serve a dime up. Like, just like the physical things, just like getting stronger in the gym, just like getting fitter by running or doing conditioning. Like, I have to nurture this part of me as well. Like, it's not I have it or I don't. It's I teach myself, whether it be like through education, asking for help, or using like a trained professional. I teach myself how I best handle pressure to get the most out of it, bring it back to its neutral way, and get my relationship to be something where it's like, I'm excited because this is a big game. I feel the pressure to perform, but I know I'm ready because I've done X, Y, Z, and I'm going to go out and do it.
Interesting. I think, and I think probably what this all kind of circles back to is that when you watch a game, you can't always tell if someone has a high ceiling for potential. They potentially might have a high ceiling for potential based on what you see. But really, where potential comes from is getting to know someone as a person. And I think the deeper you go with someone and their character and their story and their experience and who they are and why they are the way that they are is really an opportunity to fully understand what potential someone has. Like, for example, if I see, let's just say I use Tori and Shelby for an example, and I see both of you play, and I think, you know what? Technically, you guys have a lot of similarities. Tactically, you're pretty similar. But let's just say I know that, Shelby has been exposed to incredible goalkeeper training her whole life, but you haven't. To me, that might mean that you have a bit more potential because you haven't been exposed to it and what would happen if you were. And then I find out that your character is impeccable and that you're open and that you're a great teammate and that you're a joy to be around and you handle pressure situations really well, right? Like every little bit I know about you really will tell the full picture, will paint the full picture of what potential you truly have.
Right. Yeah. It's so hard, and it's just funny. Like, I keep thinking about everything you're saying, and I put it in terms of my other job at St. Joe's because so much of our job is also recruiting. Like, that's a big portion of it, and getting people to come to our university, and you want it to be the right fit for them, but they also have to be the right fit for you and your program. And there's just so many things that you don't know. I like this person because I've watched them play a handful of times, but like, till I have them on campus, I don't really know what they're looking for, what they're like. Are we the right fit for one another? And then sometimes even that's what, max you get 12 hours together. So I think that sometimes that can be one of the hardest things if you're a coach listening to this, of like, does this person have the potential? Does this person fit in with what we're looking for? Do we fit into what they're looking for? Because it's a mutual relationship. If I really like you and I think you fit in, but you don't feel the same, if you come to our school, you're not going to have the best experience you can have because you're always going to be desiring a little more. So I think that using these metrics as like your way to decide, okay, potential, here's some things I could look for, but also using them to dig deeper into, honestly, for me, it's all coming back to character. Dig deeper into character is going to tell you a lot more of what you need to know about players.
And right. And about yourself. I think that maybe, or I just want to put a little clarity on this situation too, like what we're saying about character is I don't think that you or I are saying that everybody has to be like the best version of themselves all the time, or that they have to have everything figured out, right? Or that they can't make mistakes, or they can't have like areas for improvement in their character either, because we all have areas of improvement for our character. God knows I could do a lot better in this life with a little more patience. But I think that there also is this like willingness, I think everybody at TKI is just on this like journey to be constantly like hungry. Like, and that to us will cover up any of the other deficiencies. There might be like an impatience or, but you don't have to have it all together, but character is a great sign of potential.
Yeah. And like, you can have gaps in your character, but do you have the flexibility to be like pointed out, like, hey, this is where you have a gap. Jill, you could be more patient sometimes.
Right.
Are you able to hear that and reflect and be like, you know what? Yeah, that's some good feedback for me. So it's not about being perfect. It's not about always being the person you aspire or you want to be, because we all are going to fall from that sometimes. But it's having the self-awareness to be able to come back to it.
Right. All right, Tori, I'm going to wrap this up with a question for you, and take a deep breath. If you could tell the goalkeeping community one thing that you think is the most important, and you can direct this opinion or advice or feedback to a certain group of people, coaches, players, parents, what would it be?
I'm going to go with coaches, and it's that it's so important for us to reflect upon why we're doing what we're doing and what are our methods that we're trying to use to do it. So for me, that's having a solid idea of what is my coaching philosophy and what does it look like to not only live it myself on a daily, but convey it to the players that I work with. So for me, I want to make lasting change for the athletes that I get to work with, help them continue to know who they are and be able to use that in all facets of their life and believe in themselves. But also, it's to create decision-making goalkeepers who can have the tools to be used in whatever game situation they're in. So therefore, for me on the daily, it looks like being supportive, encouraging, and it looks like teaching them in a game realistic setting that allows them to fail and make mistakes.
That was good. I also am going to go with coaches. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions of goalkeeper coaching is that there is this elite level goalkeeper and they train this certain way. And you have to train that same exact way, or it's justification for that method working when perhaps there could be a better method and more effective method to maximize the time that you get to spend with the goalkeepers that you get to work with. I also just think that there's a much better way than the traditional way of always coaching goalkeepers. I think there is a different way that is based more on science and facts than intuition and things that we've always done.
Right.
And that is a hill I will die on. And the best methods or most effective or whatever are constantly evolving. And as coaches, we need to be able to adapt with that and be curious enough to learn more about it.
Yes, ma'am.
That is my best piece of advice for coaches. And if you guys want to know more about that, please reach out to us because we are super passionate about coach education and helping coaches understand themselves and the game better so that they can help develop better goalkeepers.
That's facts and science.
Yes. You guys, we have a bunch of stuff coming up this summer. Please reach out if you need support in figuring out what one of those events or opportunities are best for you. We've got select camps coming up, which are our favorite events of the year. We're on to our 11th year of select camps and are up in the 30s to 40s of how many we've done at this point. We've got high school prep camp. We have day camps for youth players and 2-day youth camps for youth players. We've got our internship coming up. We're going to be selecting those by next week. So if you haven't got that application in and you're hearing this, there might still be time, maybe not. But if you're someone who is a senior in high school and you are looking to get into the coaching world and you need more support with that, please reach out to us because we are very, very passionate about helping you be the best coach that you can be.
Absolutely.
Until then, we'll catch you later.
We'll catch you later.